Hi there, and welcome to the Skylight Books author reading series. If you'd like to learn more about us and our many upcoming author events, please visit skylightbooks.com, where you can browse our inventory, buy books, and join our Friends with Benefits Club. You can also follow us on Twitter, Tumblr, and Facebook. To speak to a real live bookseller like me, please call 323-660-1175. Thanks for your support, and enjoy.
And so now, without further ado, we have A.G. Lombardo, who is a native Angelino, who used to teach at a Los Angeles public high school, now retired and just a writer now. And Graffiti Palace is his debut novel. And joining him is David Yulin, who I should have this memorized by now, is the author most recently of the novel Ear to the Ground, a 2015 Guggenheim Fellow. His other books include Sidewalking, Coming to Terms with Los Angeles, a finalist for the Penn Diamondstein Spielvogel Award for the Art of the Essay, and the Library of America's Writing Los Angeles, a literary anthology, which won a California Book Award. And coming up in September is the second edition of Lost Art of Reading, which is now focusing on the resistance. And they're here to discuss Graffiti Palace, which our dear Hector Tobar says, reading Graffiti Palace, I half wondered if the Watts Riots had been staged all those years ago, just so A.G. Lombardo could write a novel about it. This is a book that's as crazy and unpredictable as an urban uprising. It's a phantasmagoric, thank you guys, like I can't read, journey written in precise and haunting prose through a wounded and defiant city called Los Angeles. And just as a special bonus, we're video recording this event for a school in France who is studying this book. And so if you want to turn around and wave to the camera, otherwise if you don't, most of you aren't in it. And so here they are. Here is A.G. Lombardo to read.
Thanks for coming out, you guys. I'm going to read chapter 2 from Graffiti Palace. Americo Monk stands on the corner and studies the traffic signal. Recessed in their steel-scalloped sockets, the bulbs follow their programmed progression. Green, yellow, red. But something is wrong. The red light flickers with darkness, as if Edison, no longer able to regiment the ghetto's grids, has installed these sputtering fourth signs through the city's hoods. The signal turns to green. Now Monk can see a blackbird fluttering inside its nest, webbed in the light's cowl. He crosses San Pedro Street, walking east down 112th Street. His worn red keds seem blood orange in the dying sunlight. Run down salmon-painted apartments and power poles flank one side of the street. Every door and window is open, surrendered to the sultry, stagnant heat. He passes a liquor store and a barber shop. 3 men hunch on the curb, drinking beers from brown paper sacks. A little girl with no shoes pedals a tricycle past Monk, her reflection passing through his dark sunglasses like a sprite. A languid, suspended summer. Mother's Day, the 5th of each month when welfare checks arrive, has come and gone, and now the money's drying up. Soon it'll be Father's Day. Parole days are on the first or last day of the month, and black men and long-gone fathers and husbands will return with empty pockets. He pauses, looking up at a billboard that shimmers through the smog behind the liquor store. A student of semiotics, he remembers the sign. A black man posed with a beautiful black woman as they toast a 40-ounce bottle of beer. Old 88 malt liquor, in giant letters under their beaming faces. It'll kick your ass, assumptions. But some guerrilla urban artists attacked the billboard, pasting 2 giant white triangles, masks with black eye holes, over the faces of the black models, transforming them into cartoonish Ku Klux Klan. Rampant vandalism. Monk shakes his head, grins. He stops before the graffiti sprayed in yellow on the brick facade of a padlocked storefront. 3 numbers hyphenated like a birth date inside the drippy double loops of a capital B. 6/20/13. Monk opens his tattered blue notebook. A thick sheaf of papers, notes, diagrams, drawings of the city's graffiti and street art. Ink and pencil sketches of gang symbols, tagger signatures, homeboy art, margins filled with his crab-neat printing about locations, explanations, questions, affiliations, styles, leitmotifs, connections. He thumbs to an empty page and copies the graffito. Numbers equal letters, placement in the alphabet. 6F, 20T, 13M, FTM, fuck the man. B, for the businessman gang, Watts area. 13 also marijuana, marking territory for drug selling. Monk copies the tagger's autograph. A lowercase t with an arrow pointing up. Little t from uptown. Turning south, Monk walks on. Sun setting, he better catch another RTD freeway flyer bus back to the harbor. Karmann's gonna be pissed off. The big rent party. He smiles. She's a good woman. She'll wait for him. Like that Volkswagen convertible that shares her name, always free and open. Not just her legs, but her mind, heart, soul. Back home where the containers offer him some faint chance of containment, warrens and levels of iron shields that might stop the inundation of signs and input that he suspects will one day drown his sanity in infinite white noise and static. But Karmann, with maddening practical female radar, always laughed at him and said no, it wasn't containment that he sought in the iron wrens of the harbor, but compartments. His life was an endless series of compartmentalizations, a vast accretion of disparate selves and moments, switching off with every closed iron hatchway and on again with every open bulkhead. And now the baby coming. Ready or not, boy, it's not going to wait for you to get your shit together. His t-shirt sticks to his sweaty copper skin. Summer in the city always seems endless, an unbroken chain of tinder dry days and humid airless nights. The seasons, nature herself suspended in urban purgatory. His friends had a term for it, ghetto time, when minutes, hours, days, and nights fracture and blur and compress into a searing now, as if the atmosphere itself teeters on the verge of sparking into flames. Everyone senses this, a jittery, heat-exhausted edge in dripping faces and dark, burning eyes, every soul waiting to be consumed. On the corner of 113th Street, he stares down at the sidewalk. 7 pennies in a row. Above the pennies, a tiny Dixie cup filled with water. Below the copper line of coins, a chicken wishbone, a greasy black thread tied taut between the prongs of the bone. Gris gris, a hoodoo sign pointing east. Watch yourself, Monk. A car horn blares and he squints up through the dark filters of his glasses. A burgundy 63 Pontiac Bonneville rolls by slowly, windows down, 4 gangbangers in front and back seats. 2 black men flanking passenger side windows press their fists to the outside door panels. Monk's thumb crooks inward toward his curved index finger as the Pontiac chugs along the curb. The fists pressed against the passing car doors curl, answering Monk's sign with identical salutes. Thumb and finger for G, the gladiators. All brothers here, cool. The Bonneville skulks behind a corner. He explores this no man's land with, if not immunity, then a kind of fragile grace. These tenement streets, abandoned alleys, shuttered brick fronts, desiccated apartments, frame houses bunkered with grates and iron bars in every window, the gangs, the Slossons, East Side local boys, 8 Tray, and the rest, suffer him free passage, a fleeting transit through their interstices. Battle lines and war zones, all but invisible except for the signposts sprayed on walls, which you ignore and fail to decipher at your own peril. A motorcycle cop sputters on his Harley Davidson, faceless behind reflecting eggshell helmet. Now the cop imperceptibly nods in Monk's direction as he grinds gears east down 113th Street. Officer Reynolds, he knows almost all the cops. They too have sanctioned him safe routes, another gossamer passport through the city's shadows. His clutched, bulging notebook is a badge, papers that usher him past subtle checkpoints and border crossings. The urban graphologist and graffiti semiotician has lately proven of interest to all the city's fractious councils. The gangs and the police need Monk's arcana to track enemies, gather intelligence about new gangs, outlaw splinters, incursions, ever-shifting balances and loyalties and territories. So he moves, a double agent, inviolate for now, through the city, recorder, codemaster, pawn, but who is using whom? At Avalon and 113th Street, two men argue in front of a pawn shop. Motherfucker! They walk down the sidewalk shouting, hands gesticulating in the air like dark birds. Children laugh and splash around a broken hydrant, water cascading in the gutters, iridescent curtains raining down on soaked cotton shirts and torn pants. Where the pavement meets a low, crumbling wall skirting a weedy, vacant lot, a graffito, as if folded, half painted on the sidewalk, then extending up the wall. Two black spray-painted hands, palms outstretched, thumbs joined in the center like some kind of craning head, splayed with a fringe of fingers like ragged wings, a night demon taking flight. Monk sketches the figure out in his notebook, scribbling the location and the artist's tag in the margins. SM, capital O, capital G, Smog. Las Sombras, a legendary East LA gang from before the war, back in 41 or 42. Are they coming back? Hard to tell. The Mexican gangs have an added veil of secrecy. They're street Spanish. Monk's seen a pattern in his notebook. The black gangs seem to be creating their own Negro underground slang and symbols, learning from their Mexican rivals. He'd seen Smog's, OG for original gangster, work only once before. Maybe some kind of splinter group or homage here, tagged on the sidewalk. Pneumatic brakes hiss, Monk turns. A fire truck idles before the broken hydrant's sparkling geyser. Firemen in soaked yellow ponchos cap off the valve, shooing kids sloshing across the huge street puddle away from falling panes of water. An angry little boy skims a trash can lid across the puddle, bouncing it off a slick poncho. Sunset smog glowers over rows of bleached tenement apartments like the spine of some prehistoric behemoth. Avalon and Imperial now, cars and trucks shimmering in the heat. A car horn bleats across the street. Piñatas and purple candy skulls festoon a tiny grocery store. A beauty parlor, afros ensconced in hair dryers, undergoing secret transmutations. Another liquor store, dingy bail bonds office. Monk passes a shattered telephone booth reeking of urine. Fuck bitches drips cursively on a plaster wall. Sometimes he wants to erase, blot out all these atavistic scrawls of division and hatred, but it's impossible. All he can do is catalog it, try to glimpse the glittering, infinite cosmos of these urban signposts, or be lost, swallowed into the blinding noise of unparsed glyphs. This city is always changing, shedding its skin of underground signs and languages in paroxysms of destruction and rebirth, seething in a secret war between the dispossessed who write its street histories and the cops and power structures who destroy unsanctioned communication through anti-graffiti paint crews and incarceration and intimidation. He will be their historian. South toward 115th Street. In an alleyway behind a burned-out car hulk, two winos sharing a 40-ounce bottle of that old 88. One bum leers at Monk. "Brother, can you paradigm?" What'd he say? Now the wino's in the middle of what looks like a world record swig when his companion yanks the bottle from his mouth, foaming beer down his greasy shirt. They tussle. The bottle smashes over someone's head, beer dripping down a chin as they fall backward into clattering trash cans. A black ghetto rat, big as a cat, skitters from the rolling trash cans, glass eyes glittering at Monk as it wedges its rippling fat fur through a hole in the brick wall and disappears like some kind of plague night's apparition. Jesus, is it his imagination, or are those monsters getting bigger, gorging on who knows what kind of garbage here in Soul Town? Trash cans full of ribs, grits, fried chicken, old 88. Monk passes the alley knowing that the city's signs are sometimes more insubstantial than his spray-painted taxonomy. A fist blossoming into a probing gang sign, a stranger's threats, a child's angry missile, a car horn, a smashed bottle. The city's usual progression of violence as day flees from the sway of night's darker forces. Now, in the final smoggy prisms of the sun, women return to these blanched apartments and besieged homes, retreating behind locked doors and barred windows and security gates. Thousands of the city's women returning from work, not men. The Negro men are gone, taken by the police, drugs, booze, the open road, games of chance, pimping, girlfriends, whores, pool halls, death. Women returning to their families, to children who no longer ask about daddy, to silences and empty spaces that deafen and blast their souls. White concrete traffic barricades have been erected on 115th Street, channeling traffic, a detour towards Central Avenue. Already a businessman tag spills across a barricade, no virgin canvas of white immune from the spray can and bandana-masked face. Even this graffiti has been answered, crossed out with a clashing rebel red swath of paint from the Slossons. Barriers the Department of Public Works carefully entrenches in key sectors and corridors of the city, coordinating with LAPD not to facilitate flows of traffic, but to siphon, control the grids of color. Blacks and browns must stay within their quadrants of containment. Not yellows, Asian gangs are underground. In secret command centers bunkered throughout the city, municipal controllers hunch over blinking traffic panels and monitors and cold foam cups of black coffee, watching for any breaches, any vehicles that may slip beyond their vectors. Monk makes his way toward the Red Line bus stop. Better get back home, Karmann's waiting. When it comes to women, there's always some man waiting to take your place. Better hold on to Karmann, his grounded, swollen-bellied goddess. Across the street, a derelict glances at him, silently rambling, lips sputtering, rants to himself. Or is he speaking in some noiseless tongue to Monk? Candles in waxy glass jars encircle the sidewalk corner beyond the demolished stumps of the bus stop. Votives left for the dead, Virgin of Guadalupe candles, glass bowls of wax painted with the crucified Christ, dried flowers, faded cards, a popsicle stick crucifix. But here there are darker powers mixed with the signs of light and redemption. A dirty string with 3 knots, 7 pennies piled on a stack, an arc of white brick dust gleaming into night's dusky shadows, portending a mixed warning to Monk. Perhaps a path home, more enigmatic and twofold than he'd like. Monk turns right, trudging down Stanford Avenue. A brother leaning against the sun-baked brick front of Ace Liquors nods as Monk passes. Across the street, sunset glows and engulfs jagged rooftops and crooked antennas and looping telephone lines. The parked cars flanking him still radiate today's pulsing heat. Will cops and gangs let him pass? His notebook is a kind of spy's black book for them, an intelligence coup for cops tracking the gang's ever-shifting territories and feared alliances, and a grail to the gangs locked in constant war and turf incursions. So they wait, because the historian must write the history before it can be seized. He's always been able to pass, neither black nor white, through these battle-scarred streets. In certain lights and times of day and angles of refraction, he looks Caucasian, sometimes light Negro or copper. His hair is black, curled but not kinky, suspended in loops and ringlets. African, or in other lights and to other people, disheveled and straightened. Others see Mediterranean, white, Arabian. A walking Rorschach mirror that perhaps reflects more of the beholder than the subject. And the eyes forever, hidden under those ebony teardrop sunglasses. His grimy red Keds step off the curb now toward 116th Street. Monk clutches his sky blue notebook to his sweaty chest like St. Paul with his Bible, his face like the saints, wavering, darkening as he trudges into the dusk, faintly smoldering with today's last fading light, deeper into profane pilgrimage. Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks, that was great.
I'm tired now.
Yeah, it was, now the fun starts, right? So, all right, so we're going to talk for a bit. I'll just get my time set here. We'll talk for about 20 minutes, 25 minutes maybe, and then open it up to some questions from all of you. So let's start with, how did this project how did it first come to you? It's one of these ideas where when you see it, you're like, oh, it's almost inevitable. I mean, but it's also completely original. So how did you begin to develop this idea?
Well,
do we want to actually tell people what the general idea is? It's a sort of transposition of the Odyssey onto the landscape of the Watts Riots, right? With that theme of returning home. So
yeah. Well, like a lot of books, it's rattling around in your creative juices for quite some time, but there are basically three main themes to my book, I would say, which is graffiti, the Watts Riots, and the Odyssey. So I was always fascinated with graffiti, and being a high school teacher, graffiti was always around the school. I was conscious of it, of course, being a native Angelino, driving around, walking around LA, there's graffiti everywhere. And some of my kids in high school, they would have notebooks filled with graffiti bombs, which are colorful sort of mural graffiti, and all these drawings. They were fascinated with it.
Is it their own drawings or drawings that they were copying off the walls, or both? Or?
Both, and they would take pictures and copy, all this graffiti, and some of it's great, right, and it's artistic. So. Gradually, I found some essays, and I actually started teaching some graffiti essays to my 11th and 12th graders. And then, I just personally was fascinated with graffiti as an underground language. It's like the voice of the dispossessed. And I would see it, like, for instance, if I would see a billboard scrawled with graffiti, and I'd think, well, that's great. They're jamming the official consumer message here, and then I would even see graffiti on the reverse of the billboards, and I would think, well, they're making their own free billboard signs out of graffiti. So all this graffiti was rumbling around my mind, and then, I had taught the Odyssey quite a few times to my 12th graders because we did it as part of World Lit. So the Odyssey was all writers are aware of the Odyssey. It's the first great novel, right?
Right.
More or less, and
it's a template for like every road novel ever written, right? It grows out of the
exactly.
Odyssey.
Yeah, it's Jack Kerouac. It's the prototype, and so I was so I had the Odyssey going for me, and of course, we've all of us lit guys have read James Joyce's Ulysses, and and to do an update of the Odyssey would be a great thing. So that was rattling around too, and then. Maybe I even got subconsciously, I got the idea of the graffiti in the notebook from my students. I don't know, but it's, writers aren't 100% in control of what they do. So once I had the idea of graffiti in the notebook and this guy going through LA. And then I was kind of thinking about the Odyssey, and then I thought, but okay, I have L.A., so what's going to happen in L.A.? And of course, it's not a big stretch to think about the Watts riots, the Rodney King riots. I'm thinking, okay, I'm going to do the Watts riots. I mean, it wasn't that cut and dry, but that's how it all sort of, came together, I think.
And what kind of, so this is your first novel. Were you writing all along, or was this something that you wanted to do when you were teaching literature? Obviously, deeply invested in writers and writing and books. But what was the thing that made the jump from sort of reading and teaching into the territory of writing for yourself?
I've always been a writer, not always, but I wrote short stories when I was a kid. When I was a teenager, like a lot of adolescent boys, I discovered Edgar Allan Poe and H.P. Lovecraft, and I was heavily into horror films and fantasy and so forth. And I was always writing. I have this little story I want to tell that's very funny. In fact, I was buying Poe and Lovecraft's books and fantasies and so forth, and so I bought this first edition of H.P. Lovecraft, and it finally came in this big box, and it said Lovecraft at last, because it was like collected works. So my mom brought it in, and she said, "I don't know why you have to order these kinds of books," So, but I was always writing, and Graffiti Palace was not my first attempt at a novel. I wrote a couple of novels, but I wasn't ready. They weren't
right.
They weren't good. So and then just teaching Graffiti Palace just sort of came to be. I started it. I want to say like 10 or 12 years ago. I started it, and I don't want to get too far off the track, but what happened was I wrote the book, and then I wrote a query letter, which is a one-page letter, to interest publishers, and then brilliantly I sent the letter directly to the New York publishing houses, right, which was really brilliant. So of course I was, completely ignored, of course. So then I put the book back in the electronic drawer of my computer, and I moved on to other projects, or notes for projects. I was teaching. I was, I had a life. And then I thought, I'll try to get an agent. And then I thought, an agent is like a catch-22 thing, where an agent's not interested unless you're published, but you can't get published unless you have an agent. So I took the letter out again, and I sent it to a few agents, and a few months later I got an email from Bonnie Nadell, my agent, and she said that she liked the first chapter, so I sent her the first chapter, and then a few weeks later Bonnie called me and said, send in the whole book. And so that was a great moment for me. And then it's also kind of funny how I worked on the ending of the book 5 times. I don't know if you remember this, Bonnie. I'm sure you do. I worked on the ending of the book 5 times. I couldn't write the ending. Every time I sent her an ending, she said, "This is horrible. Do it again."
I've had that
go back.
experience.
Yeah. So so number 5. I was like, I didn't know what to do. So number 5, I just sent it in, and finally I got an email from her, I don't know, like a week later or whatever, and she said, "Your ending is beautiful," and that was that.
Well, let's talk a little bit about that, because one of the challenges of writing a book like this, I would imagine, is that because you are kind of using a template that we know. I mean, for me, one of the most sort of interesting things about the book is that I have the sense of what's going to happen. I'm not going to say what happens because I don't want to spoil it for anybody, but I'm really curious about how it happens, right? Like, I know that it's going to be a battle for Monk to get from where he is back home. So in terms of that ending, or in terms of those challenges of creating scenes, it's not a direct one-to-one correlation, although he does move through. He has his Odyssey. What were the challenges for you in terms of writing a book that was both original, you're creating these characters, you're recreating this landscape, but is also kind of pulling on the movement of a well-known work?
Yeah, it's challenging. I wasn't really in full control of what I was doing. The book is 320 pages. When I sent it to Bonnie, it was 460 pages. So what I was doing is I had a lot of notes, and I'm not a stickler for plot. And remember, I'm just a guy writing by myself in my room. I had no expectations of it being published. Mm-hmm. My track record, I had no track record. But
that's liberating in a way, right?
That's
because
liberating.
You can do what you want to do.
You write without a net, because I'm just writing for myself. You got to write the kind of books that you wish you could read.
Exactly.
And I'm thinking, if I don't write this, who the hell's going to write this crazy book? No, nobody.
Right.
But to answer your question, David, so what happened was, I had some really key ideas of plotting it along with the Odyssey, mm-hmm. right? I had those iconic riffs I wanted to do, like the Cyclops. You got to have the Cyclops, and Odysseus tied to the mast. And you have to hit those high points, and in between, though, I was just having fun having Monk going through L.A., going through the riots. He was encountering, scary things, but he was also encountering paranormal things. I guess the spirit of the Odyssey sort of took over, and Monk encounters prophets and witches. Voodoo practitioners, and a lot of even crazier things. But following the Odyssey, I wanted to hit those high points. Like also, the Odyssey has Tiresias. Mm-hmm. This goes to your question. Tiresias in the Odyssey was the blind prophet, and he gives Odysseus clues about how to continue with his quest. So I had this idea. This is 1965, the Watts Riots. There were just phone booths. So I wanted Monk to have to go to these phone booths, mm-hmm. where he would get clues from a mysterious stranger named Tyre, or short for Tiresias. And in the book, Tiresias takes on different shapes because in the Odyssey, Tiresias is a shapeshifter. So Monk sees him in a shoe shine stand as sort of a shoe shine guy, and then later in the book he sees him as a sort of a mumbling, blind, crazy street preacher, and then as a disembodied voice. So I found that a lot of things worked with the Odyssey, and when it didn't, I was just having fun writing the story. I wasn't chained to a plot.
Right. And you're also creating the kind of crazy, Hector's word's exactly right, phantasmagoric kind of landscape of Los Angeles in general, and particularly of Los Angeles in that moment where, the lid has just been blown off and everything is up in the air, which I imagine from a writing point of view gives you all kinds of freedom to sort of, you can go as weird as you want to go because the situation you're writing out of is so out of control to begin with. So that also must be a kind of a liberating factor in terms of how you can bring all of these elements in.
Yeah, because the book, I consider Graffiti Palace urban fantasy. Mm-hmm. It's a bit of magical realism, a little bit of science fiction, and a lot of mainstream fiction too. But once I was sort of going down the road of the Odyssey, I realized that it was a fantasy, and there were no limits, mm-hmm. and. But the saving grace too was that it was firmly anchored in reality, which was the Watts Riots. Right. And so it was as I look at the book now, it was kind of a balancing act because the book is very wild, but it never gets away. It never goes off into a dreamland or into something that's not believable. It's paranormal at times. It's fantastic at times, but it's as much as I could. I wanted to ground it in reality.
And I mean that's why you use historical figures, right? The traffic stop that triggers the riots is actually presented as as a fictional scene, but as it happened with the real people and their real names. There are real historical figures who show up in the book. Elijah Muhammad,
yes,
as an example. So I'm curious about that. Maybe more in terms of Elijah Muhammad, but that decision to sort of interpose those kind of historical figures in the fictionalized landscape of the novel.
Yeah, Graffiti Palace was written over a period of many years, and as I researched the book, I realized that there were all these wonderful real life people and events, and in many cases it was crazier than the stuff I was trying to write, so I had to incorporate it. For example, Tiresias in Graffiti Palace communicates with Monk via the telephone booths. Well, in my research, I found something called the last American telephone booth, which is a big thing on the internet. You can Google it, and allegedly the most remote telephone booth in America. There really was one. It was out in Mojave. And it was out in the middle of nowhere. Just imagine a dirt road going out into the wasteland and only a line of telephone poles connecting it. And in this real-life telephone booth, all the outsiders of the world would congregate. It was a mecca for outcasts and for tramps and travelers and prophets. So and people would go there and they would make phone calls to strangers and have these bizarre conversations, and then or they would just wait there and the phone would ring because the phone booth and its telephone line became famous. And they would wait for the phone to ring and just pick it up and have some bizarre conversation with a stranger. And of course the booth was completely covered in graffiti. So I had to work that into my book, and it wasn't difficult because I've got Tiresias on the phone helping Monk in a few scenes. Another great example is this really blew my mind is Gene Roddenberry. You guys know that Gene Roddenberry is the inventor of Star Trek, right? Captain Kirk, the Enterprise, all that great franchise stuff. Well, actually during the Watts Riots, Gene Roddenberry was actually a cop. He was a sergeant. And he was Chief Parker's right-hand man. Chief Parker was the police chief during the Watts Riots. And it's very funny because, the cops and Parker back then, there was no idea of community policing. It didn't exist. The cops were more like just enforcers. They just swarmed and they just knocked the hell out of you and put you in jail. I mean, that was the end of the story. And Roddenberry was Parker's sergeant, and Roddenberry actually wrote the speeches for Parker, and he actually helped develop the containment policy to quell the Watts Riots. And I riff on that. To me, it's very funny because Roddenberry is like Space Patrol. He's the master of outer space. But in my book, the space he's controlling is the actual grids of L.A., the city, to contain the rebellion, right? So and there's a lot more there, and there's Tokyo Rose. So Tokyo Rose. Just very quickly, Tokyo Rose was the famous propagandist in World War II. She was born in L.A., and she had the misfortune of going back to Japan during right after Pearl Harbor, and she was stuck there, and they wouldn't let her come back. And she was half American, half Japanese. So the Japanese government forced her to do propaganda against the U.S. troops, right? So. She actually went to school in Compton, and once I found that out, I said, "Well, she's going in my book."
Right.
I don't care how fucking weird it is.
No,
she's going in my book.
But that's the great part of it, right? Is that you can put all of those, all those figures can show up in the book, and because of the landscape you've set up, it makes complete sense. Like, of course, he's going to run into Tokyo Rose or Elijah Muhammad or cross paths with Roddenberry. I mean, it's almost like, I don't know, the whole situation is so weird that all of those elements fit perfectly, and then they have direct roots to the community also, which is even better. I want to ask you about the research. It's always a tricky question to ask in terms of a novel, because you don't want to have too much research. You don't want the research to kind of take over, get in the way of the creativity. But how much research? You are a native Angelino, so that story is part of your cultural DNA. But how much research did you do, and how did you do it? Did you do it sort of beforehand, or did you do it to kind of fill in gaps as you were moving through the book?
I did some research before I started the book. Most of it was just a lot of miscellaneous notes that I had to sort of whip into shape. I read a lot of books on the Watts Riots. There's a couple of really important reportage books about the Watts Riots. One is by Gerald Horn, who's an eminent African American reporter. He wrote a book called Fire This Time, and it's a masterful history of the Watts Riots. Another book that I turned to, there was a he's dead now, but there was a really great journalist, American journalist. His name was Robert Connaught, and he wrote a seminal. The first history of the riots came out in '67, I think, and it was called "Rivers of Blood, Years of Darkness."
Oh yeah, it was a great book.
You know that one. So I of course I read those. I read everything I could. So I did a lot of research and on the background of the riots. The Odyssey, I read the Odyssey again, and I looked at it as what can I use this time, as a novel. And I looked into a little bit of LA history, and then a lot of it though was researching as I went too. Like I said before, I'm not a writer that's driven by plot. Luckily I have Bonnie, and I have Sean McDonald, my New York publisher and editor, to reel me in. Because otherwise, like I said, it was almost a 500-page book. But I'm the kind of writer that just writes things, and if it's funny or if it's weird or new, then that's where it is. But Bonnie and Sean and others with more reasoning, deliberate minds than my own, would say, well, that's fine, but you can't just make up stuff. Like I thought, it didn't matter what street that this action takes place. This street goes to there, and they would say, no, this street, it runs north. You have to,
right.
So they were always grounding me in reality, which is good because if you have a detail that doesn't belong, you need a suspension of disbelief. It takes you out of the story.
It breaks the fictional dream,
Yeah.
right? It's one of the reasons, I was talking to someone, to Andrew about this before, right? It's one of the reasons I love the film Falling Down, because the geography works, right? As he moves his way across Los Angeles, he gets from, the neighborhoods work. They're not dropping it in. And that was something I really, really admired about the book, that I felt the geography was so kind of clearly delineated. I could kind of almost map him in my head as he was moving through the landscape.
I had a lot of help with that too in the editing process, but when you write a book, it sounds egotistical, but you really have to go for it, and you really have to think that you're going to try to write something that's really good. I actually said to myself, I'm going to write the best book ever written about LA. I'm not saying it is, that's what I tried to do. Then I said, I'm going to write the best book ever written about American riots and the racial themes and that underlie those things. And you have to set yourself that bar, because you'll fail, but at least fail mightily.
Yeah, exactly. If you don't go for it, then what's the point?
Yeah.
So I have one more question before I turn it over, which I think has to do with that in some way. One of the thing that struck me first as I was reading the first pages of the novel before I got into the story was the language, right? The language is electric, and really exciting in the sense that it's idiosyncratic and it's individual, and it feels like all those sentences, each sentence feels like it's going for it. And I hate or hesitate to ask a writer about language because I feel like it's a fingerprint in some way. It's sort of how we use it. But I did want to get a sense of your sense of kind of the linguistic landscape of the novel, because it is so distinctive and it draws us into that kind of heightened reality, right? The heightened reality of the language and the heightened reality of Monk's observations match the heightened reality of the situation he finds himself in, so that the book is kind of pitched at all these levels. So I wanted to just sort of get your sense of how that developed, because I think it's one of the most remarkable parts of the book.
Thank you, David. When I write, I like to write when I can in the present tense, because it's visceral, it's immediate, it's happening now. I'm try to put the reader right in the middle of the action, not past tense. Mm-hmm. Not that there's anything wrong with past tense, but it's just not something I'm not very attracted to all the time. Also, again, because I'm not a strong writer of plots, I think every paragraph has to be like a poem. Every paragraph, a reader has to read a paragraph and say, "Wow, that's beautiful," or "That's really that sounds like music." I had one of the reviewers. I don't know if it was John York from Los Angeles Review of Books or whatever, but he was saying that other people too have said that the music is like jazz, mm-hmm. And so music and I'm sorry, the language is like jazz. And so that's true. In other words, language to me is something that you hear. And so a paragraph should be like a prose poem. And to me, if it doesn't advance the plot, that's okay. You'll get there. Mm-hmm. And so I like to write in the present tense. And one thing that everyone's told me about this book is that they always say, "Wow, you the way you describe things, it's so vivid. It just jumps into my mind." And so I think I'm very influenced by film, by cinema. I try to every scene I try to paint the picture. You got to feel it and see it. And I'm not so much worried about the meaning. I know I that's in there too. But you have to trust your readers. Readers are intelligent. They'll figure it out. But you have to paint a beautiful picture. And one other thing that sort of goes along with the language is the setting. I'm attracted to extreme settings like wars, riots, upheavals, revolutions. Not that I'm, the book I'm working on next involves the military. What I like about that is extreme situations bring out the best and worst in people. And if you want to write about a love affair or a divorce, set it in an interesting background. You can still do what you want to do, but make the background interesting. And the other corollary of that thing for me is my book is classified. On the copyright page, it says 20th century fiction. It says historical fiction. I'm attracted to historical fiction. I like setting stories in the past. Mm-hmm. It doesn't have to be the deep past, but I like setting things in the past. And without getting belaboring this point, what I like about setting things in the past is, unless you're incredibly skillful, if you write about the present moment, it's hard to separate the junk culture from the profound stuff, and you're in danger of your book being, just out of date immediately. Like 1996. I mean, what's so great about 96? Probably nothing. But if you set your book back a little bit, from hindsight, you can really use the landmarks and the culture of that time, and for me, it's just a fascinating process.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. Well, thank you very much. So it's been great. Let's open it up to some questions.
Thanks, David.
Let's applaud first.
Oh, thank you guys for coming out.
And then let's open it up to some questions from the assembled. Don't be shy. Yeah.
Yes.
I was just curious where you taught in high school and if that setting influenced any of the scenes or the neighborhoods, and also where you grew up in LA.
Okay. I taught at San Fernando High School, which is kind of near Van Nuys and Pacoima in East Valley. And in fact, I have one of my fellow teachers, Lori, is here. As far as I wouldn't say it influenced me too much. Aside from the graffiti I talked about, having the kid becoming cognizant of graffiti around the school and around the neighborhood, I don't think teaching influenced me too much. Aside from that, and I mean teaching the Odyssey also. I was born in Alhambra, and my father was from New York originally, and he moved to L.A. And my mom was born in Boyle Heights, and she had her mother had a boarding house, and my father had TB. And they thought he was only going to live for a couple of years. He was in New York, so they shipped him out to L.A., where he met my mother. And it turns out that the TB didn't kill him, and he lived to a ripe age. But I was born in Alhambra, and we lived there for a while. And then we moved out to my folks moved to Van Nuys after that. Yeah.
I'm curious about the graffiti that influenced the book. You said you taught some graffiti essays.
Yeah.
What did those involve, and has that opened you up more to? You said you noticed it more, but how much do you notice it here? Because as a former vandal, I guess, once you start doing it and seeing it, you don't stop seeing it. It becomes a repetitive motive in every neighborhood you go. So I was curious if you could talk a little bit more about.
Well, yeah. So there's nothing wrong with controversy, and graffiti is very controversial. It's one man's art, and it's another man's vandalism. I found some essays to teach in the 12th grade, and there were essays that about taggers and about graffiti art shops. They had some in LA, downtown LA, where the graffiti, sort of quasi professional graffiti artists would practice in a safe environment where they wouldn't get busted by the cops. But for me, graffiti. I didn't realize this when I was writing the book, but Graffiti Palace is all about communication and the limits of communication and the breakdown of communication and the success of communication. And graffiti is so fascinating as a form of communication because it's underground, it's an outlaw, but also it has its artistic acceptance now in some quarters. For me, it represented the voice of the dispossessed, the voice of anger, of people being disenfranchised. So it was, as a subculture, as an underground thing, to me it was very interesting. And my students, as Lori knows, my fellow teacher, a lot of our students were just obsessed with graffiti. They would, in fact, they were such pros. They would do the graffiti first on stickers, on decals, so they could, I guess they're called slap-ons, and they'd slap them on so they wouldn't get caught, because you could do that in a second. Like I said, they had notebooks full of them, and after a while, I thought, and I didn't make this up, because I thought, let's do high-interest reading material. Let's get essays about graffiti, and we had a 12th grade consumable textbook, and there were a couple of essays in there about graffiti. And one kid was doing graffiti and this is in the essay, and got shot and killed. And so I mean, it's a very teachable subject.
You tried writing down anything?
No, just my computer. No, I never did. I bet it would be I can see the appeal. I can see the adrenaline. Yeah. Lori.
You were toiling at San Fernando High School, and we didn't really know. Most of us didn't know that you were a writer until sort of toward the end. And you sound kind of cavalier, like, I was just writing the book that I wanted to read. But you were also sending it out to agents and hoping the world would see it. So can you talk just a little bit about that tension and or long suffering, doing the craft, where you're doing it for yourself, but you really are hoping someone out there is going to care. I mean, what was that like? And just anything about that process of keeping it going.
Yeah, in my opinion, people that want to write, sometimes they'll ask writers, they'll say, well, where do you get your ideas? How do you write? How do you do it? And the truth is, if you're going to be a writer, you'll be a writer. It's something that cannot be taught. No disrespect to MFA programs. You can learn a lot about style and stuff like that. But to be a writer, you have to do a lot of reading, and you have to be hungry for it. It has to be something inside of you. In other words, for many years, I just thought of myself as an unpublished writer. Mm-hmm. And sometimes I would go to bed and I would be okay with it. I'd say, look, guy, you're a writer. You wrote 5 pages. You did that story was great. That book you're working on is great. I got to remember not to say any F words because we're being videotaped. I already slipped once, and I apologize, France. But for a long time, I was saying to myself, you're going to be an unpublished writer. That's and the time I spent trying to send stuff out to get published is like less than 1%. I mean, you do a chain letter. You do a 1-page query letter. Once you spend a week writing the perfect letter, but once you do that, there's nothing else to do. You send it out and you get rejected. I had 2 short stories published in 91 and 92, I think, around there. One was in Zizova, which is a famous West Coast literary magazine. And having those stories published was extremely gratifying. But, I had to keep working on my books because that's the only thing I thought I was good at.
Yeah, I always think of it as if you can be dissuaded, then be dissuaded, right? If you can be talked out of it, then you're not a writer. And the writers are the ones who are either, too stubborn or can't do anything else or just too monomaniacal. And, it's just, you can tell me 100,000 times that I can't do it, and I'm going to get up and keep doing it. You know? And I think that's what has to happen.
I mean, in many ways, my story is kind of a Cinderella story. Just plugging away for many years, and sometimes having expectations, but more often not. And just writing as much as I could, but I couldn't write full time until just a few months ago because I had a family. I had to earn money. I was teaching full time. Believe me, teaching high school is very stressful. It's a full-time job. How the hell can you teach high school and write a novel? It's enough to make you blow your brains out. But I did because I could not stop because it's the only thing that I'm good at. And Graffiti Palace is a good book.
Yeah.
I've been very fortunate with the reviews. The reviews have been really lovely, and I'm grateful.
One more? You have time? Yeah.
I just barely started it, but I love the language and the jazzy musicality of it. I also am noticing use of the N-word and wondering if you thought about that at all, or if you feel that that was just relevant language historically, and if you use it throughout the book.
Of course, the N word is a very hot topic, and I had to use it when it was historically inevitable. When I have scenes with cops arresting African Americans, beating them with clubs, they're not going to say get into the patrol car, Negro. They're going to use the N-word. It's in the historical record. So, with all sensitivity to the freight and the hurtfulness of that word, you have to use it in its historical context. Otherwise, your dialogue would just sound phony.
Have you received any response from the African American community, like in SO1 bookstore? This is my first question. And my second question is, do you plan to translate it in French? And
okay. Yes. I'm not aware of any specific, African American response to my book yet. The only thing I know so far about that topic is the appropriation of black culture is a very controversial thing today. You've read about the singer that was accused of stealing black music in movies and also sometimes in books. African Americans feel that they're being exploited and that they're being co-opted by white writers, white filmmakers, white musicians. So it's a complicated problem, and it's a very serious issue. But you have to look at each individual work individually, because to me, this is just my prejudice. The novel is the highest form of art, and novelists such as myself, we're not writing this book to make a buck. The book was written anyway. Nothing would have stopped me from writing the book. I'm just a man in a room with no expectations. And so, in other words, the writer writes the book and tries to create something beautiful, tries to create the greatest art that he or she can. And then afterwards we'll let the chips fall where they may. If you're a good writer, you're not going to exploit anybody. For example, just quickly to give you two examples, in a few years ago, science fiction writers have always done this. They've never thought twice about writing about different genders, different races. Hell, they even went out of our species. They'd write about different species, different objects. You've got great, two great African American writers like Samuel Delany and Octavia Butler. Are two great black writers, and I don't even like pigeonholing people in science fiction, but these are writers that wrote great white characters. They wrote great black characters. They would write about women or about men. Writers shouldn't have any borders. The only thing that stops you is your talent. If you're writing about a real character and you're not creating a stereotype, then that's what you want to do. To answer your other question, my novel is being published in France, and it will be available in French. The novel is also being published in Italy and the UK, and Greece because of the Odyssey.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Did I answer your question?
Yes, so I'll see you on the French TV then.
Yes. Thank you.
Right. Other question? Any other? We can take one more. I think if there's another question, or we can move to the buying and signing of books part of the evening, which we like to encourage. So, all right. So, thank you, Guy.
Thank you, David.
Thank you all for coming. Buy this book. Read this book. Buy more than one copy of this book.
Okay. Thank you for coming out.
Buy other books too.
Yeah.
Buy books in general.
Thanks for coming out too in the drizzly night.
You've been listening to the Skylight Books author reading series. Don't forget, you can listen to this and all of our other great podcasts at skylightbooks.com. Thanks again for stopping by, and we hope to see you soon.